Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar for the NSF Regional Innovation Engines Program, which we also call the NSF Engines Program. My name is Dmitri Perkins, and I'm the lead program officer for the NSF Engines Program within the NSF's recently formed Directorate for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. The purpose for today's webinar is twofold. In part one, we'll summarize the recent revisions to the engine's BAA funding call, highlighting some key changes that will impact Type 2 proposal preparation and submission process. Part two, we'll discuss the intent and expectations of the evaluation plans to be included in Type 2 proposals. So please feel free to submit questions via the Zoom Q&A feature. Following each part of the webinar, we will address as many questions as possible. We will be collecting all questions and creating an FAQ that will be posted on the NSF Engines website. And you can see the link to the resources page in the chat now. And before we start our session today, we also want to emphasize that everything we discuss here is explained in much more detail in the BAA, the funding call. And as we speak today, we'll be highlighting select portions of the BAA to explain the program, and specifically related to the changes and the evaluation component. But please note that if there's a discrepancy between what we say here versus the BAA, the language in the BAA is the guidance that you should follow. You can also find or download a version of the BAA, the most recent version of the BAA, and Sulema has posted that link in the chat as well. All right, so the part one, we're going to focus on an overview of the BAA changes. And so if we can go to the next slide, you can find this list of revisions also posted on the NSF Engines webpage, and Sulema is adding that link in the chat session as well. And so we'll just go through each of these, and for some of them that need more discussion, we'll highlight a few key points about those. And so the first revision, obviously most of you have probably seen this, is that the Type 2 deadline is now January the 18th, 2023 at 5 p.m. the submitter's local time. And so that's in the previous BA, the deadline was January 31st, but now the new deadline is January 18th. The second revision is that Type 2, or actually this remains consistent what is in the previous versions of the BAA. Type 2 letters of intent will be submitted via the NSF BAM portal, and you can see the BAM portal at bam.nsf.gov. But unlike the letters of intent that will be submitted via the BAM portal, the Type 2 full proposals will actually be submitted via research.gov. So let's go to the next slide and the next slide. So we want to highlight some key implications now that we're going to submit proposals via research.gov. And so in order to submit proposals via research.gov, this is primarily for new organizations. If you've already submitted proposals to NSF in the past, you would have already have completed these steps. But for new organizations, there are several registration requirements. If you're the lead organization, you must register your organization with sam.gov. And when you register your organization with sam.gov, you would also receive a unique entity identifier. We call this the UEI number. After registering with sam.gov and receiving the UEI, then the lead organization must then register with NSF using the sam.gov issued UEI. For subaward organizations, subawardees must also obtain a UEI. However, there is an option within sam.gov that allows subawardees to receive a UEI only without actually registering with sam.gov. So if you're a subawardee, you may choose this option. It's much faster, requires much less upload of data and so forth about the organization. So it's a much faster process. But if you do not register and only receive the UEI, you then cannot be the lead organization. And so once the sub-awardee receives the UEI, then the sub-awardee must also then register using the SAM.gov issued UEI, must register with NSF. All right, and so then there's a third category, distinct from the organizations, is that all PIs and co-PIs, or PDs and co-PDs, must register with NSF as well and obtain an NSF ID. And as you are registering with NSF, you want to select a particular role. So within research.gov, there are a number of different role assignments. And for co-PIs or co-PDs, you want to request that you be assigned as a PI role within research.gov. And once you've created an NSF ID and been assigned a PI role, then the PIs can log into research.gov and actually create and upload documents for the full proposal. So next slide, please. So this slide kind of walks through the journey, if you will, for a lead organization. And so it's just a timeline of events. So the lead organization, again, must register with SAM.gov and obtain a UEI. The second step would be to register with NSF using the UEI that it obtained in the first registration with SAM.gov. And so then each lead organization must have someone designated as the administrator, an AOR, an authorized organization representative. And the administrator is responsible for assigning roles within the organization. The AOR is responsible for actually submitting the proposal on behalf of the organization. And then there's the PD or CEO must also register with NSF, and all three must receive an NSF ID. Now, all three entities could be the same individual. So the same individual could give him or herself the role as administrator, AOR, and CEO. This is really up to the organization, but typically these are separate roles. And so once the administrator is assigned his or her NSF ID, the lead PD would request that he or she be assigned the PI role. The administrator would receive an email and approve the PD as having a PI role within research.gov. Once this approval has taken place, the PD CEO now has permission to actually create proposals in research.gov and also add all the co-PIs, co-PDs, and all senior personnel to the proposal. Once the co-PIs and co-PDs have been added to the proposal, they will receive emails notifying them that this is taking place, and then they too can access the proposal to upload documents and work on the proposal. And then, of course, the final stage is to actually prepare and write the proposal. And then the final step would be the AOR of the lead organization would then submit the final proposal. So it's important to note that at this stage, where the PD wants to add co-PIs and co-PDs, that these co-PIs and co-PDs would have already need to have registered with NSF and received the NSF ID. So the only way that a co-PI from the lead organization or sub-award organization can be added to the proposal is if they themselves have registered with NSF and been issued an NSF ID. Next slide, please. And so this slide kind of gives us a journey for the sub-awardee organization. Similarly, the sub-awardee organization must obtain a UEI via SAM.gov, must register with NSF in step number 2. Once the sub-awardee is registered with NSF, the lead organization could then add those sub-awardees to the proposal, allowing budgets and budget justification documents to be uploaded for all of its sub-awardees that have been added to the proposal. And then the fourth step here is that any individual within the subawardee organization that will serve as a PI or senior personnel on the project must also register with NSF and obtain an NSF ID. And then the fifth step here, any individual co-PI senior personnel that has been assigned to the proposal can now actually work on the proposal, access the proposal via research.gov, upload documents. And then finally, the AOR of the lead organization would then submit the proposal on behalf of the lead organization and all of the subawardees. Next slide, please. And so then a fourth change is there have been new requirements added to the project summary, which will now be uploaded as a PDF. And Becky, you can go to the next slide. And so just briefly, the project summary cannot exceed 1 page. The project summary must have 3 sections labeled with the following headings: overview, intellectual merit, and broader impacts. It's important to note that, and you'll find all of this information in the BAA and on research.gov as well. It's important to note that to be valid and pass the compliance check, each of these headers must be on a single line with no other text on the line. And so it's key to follow these instructions precisely. Any proposal that does not have all 3 sections will be returned without review. And then finally, the final bullet there is in your project summary, we ask that you include a list of 5 key words that describe the proposed project, whether it's with regard to the use-inspired research, the workforce development, any 5 keywords or phrases that the team feels accurately describe. Next slide, please. So a fifth change, the project description will now also be required to include a separate section for broader impacts. For details on that inclusion, you can see the subsection A.4.3 in the project description, which describes the content of that section. Next slide. Okay, so the sixth change, the existing and new resources to be made available document has always been a requirement in the BAA, but now that you're submitting via research.gov for type 2 proposals, this document will be included as a supplemental document. And so when you access research.gov, you'll see a number of different sections where proposers must upload documents, and this document must be included in the section under supplemental documents. Great. And so one major change that is fully new to the BAA is that type 2 proposals must now include a region of service map. And so this notion of region of service has always existed in the BAA. And the tools that we've created here will allow the proposers to define a more granular map, including states and counties. And so I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Daniel Goetzel, to describe the new tools and the map that can be used to generate a supplemental document.
Great. Thank you so much, Dmitri. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this new tool that we've created. And we also will drop some more details in an explanation video into the chat as well, so that you can dig into this in greater detail afterwards. But we did a lot of learning from the concept outline stage and realized there are a lot of different ways to define a region of service. So in order to have a more precise understanding of each applicant's region of service and also the geographic distribution of applications coming in from across the country, we've created a tool where you can go to uscensus.gov, draw a map around your proposed region of service, then edit that map if there's counties or others that are not a part of your region of service, and then basically export that map into an Excel document, as you can see in the middle here, the supplemental document, and just drop it in. And that will give us all the information that we need in terms of the states, the counties, and the FIPS codes, which are a combination of state and county data, so that we can better understand your region of service. We've created a multi-step PDF that helps explain that. You'll see that in the the BAA supplemental documents, and then we've also created an instructional video. But really hope that this makes it an easy process to draw your region of service. We want you to be as precise as possible. So if there are counties that are not a part of your region of service, even if they are within the state in which you're serving or states within you're serving, please pull those out. We really want to know directly what your region of service looks like and what that impact will look like. I can answer questions later, but I'll turn it back to Dmitri now.
Thanks, Daniel. Okay. So another important revision, inclusion in the BAA for Type 2 proposals is the requirement to include a mandatory disclosure document. And Becky, you can go to the next slide. And so this mandatory disclosure document is consenting to disclose some summary information, which will include the submission title, the lead organization name, geographical information about the region of service, the name of the lead PI, and a summary of the proposed project description, not to exceed 5 lines. And you would submit all of this as part of the proposal as a supplemental document, as a single copy document. And then you want to close the document with this statement. I insert the PI's name, hereby consent to the disclosure of a summary of my Type 2 proposal as described in the BAA. And so this information will be used primarily just to display the distribution of received proposals throughout the various regions. It may also be used to share information with other potential funders, other agencies, federal agencies, or foundations that have an interest in funding proposals in various regions. And so all Type 2 proposals are required to submit this mandatory disclosure document. And then finally, now that we're using research.gov, there are some documents that are just-in-time documents with respect to the BA. That is, they're not required at the time of proposal submission, but will be requested should your proposal move to the next stage and be invited for site visits. But in research.gov, for example, current and pending support and facilities, equipment, and other resources are required documents at the time of proposal submission. And so we've included some additional instructions for the proposals in the BAA. Primarily, all of these documents that are required, you would simply create a document and put not applicable and then upload that at the time of submission. And if these documents are needed at a later time, then you will receive a request from the program officer. And so all of those details can be found in the BAA itself on how you're going to create those documents and upload them. And so next slide, Becky. Okay, so yep, I think that's it for this section. And so now we can pause and take any questions that you may have related to these changes. And then after this short Q&A, we'll move to part 2. So do we have any questions posted yet? And just as a reminder, for this particular webinar, we would like to address questions related to the changes in the BAA and or the evaluation component. Any questions, other questions, you can send to engines@nsf.gov and we'll be glad to answer those.
All right, we did have a few questions. Thank you for asking your questions. In regards to the BAA revisions and some other outstanding questions. So the first one is there a length limit on the LOI, and will written instructions be provided for the submission of the LOI? Daniel, if you could take this one.
Dmitri, why don't I turn this one to you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so there is a length restriction on the LOI. For type 2s, it's actually 9,000 characters. There's a character limit. So the LOI, you will not upload a PDF document. Once you log into BAM, all of the information will be directly entered into a form. The actual summary information for the LOI will be accepted via text box within the BAM intake form.
Okay, next question. In the BAA, it says to use NSF 23200Y as the funding opportunity number. This option does not exist on the list of possible funding opportunity numbers. 23200 does exist. Do we use 23200?
Yes, use 23200. That will be updated in the next iteration of the BA. It's NSF 20 without the Y.
The next question, are there any more detailed instructions for what should be included in the broader impact section? Sorry, other than what's in the BAA under A 4.3. This section doesn't seem to discuss what information should be included under broader impacts.
Sure. 1 second, and I can give you a precise reference to the So I'm going to drop a link in the chat.
Okay. Next question, if anyone can answer. Is there a recommended start date? Is there an estimated start date for Type 2 awards?
The estimated start date, to make the award. So back to the previous question, Korie, is there additional information on broad impact? So I dropped a link in the chat that points everyone directly to that section in the PAPG that describes the content that would be included in the broader impact statement. The expected award date for Type 2s, what we can say now is that we expect to make awards in FY23 for Type 2s. We don't have a specific date yet, but we do expect to make awards in FY23.
Awesome. Next question, can you define serving for the region of service?
I'm sorry, say that once again.
Sure, I can take that one. Can you define serving in region of service? So I think this is around the region of service mapping tool. So it's the same definition that we had in earlier presentations. What are the communities that are going to be co-creating? What are the communities that are going to be impacted by this NSF engine? What are the communities that are going to kind of be a central component of it? So what we want is for you to kind of think really intentionally about what that looks like. And rather than perhaps some of the broader definitions that we saw in the concept outline stage, we want you to think about the specific counties within your region of service that will be impacted and served as a part of your engine effort.
Thank you. And there was an additional question to that. Is there contact information for tech support on the required region map piece? I think some people are having trouble with the spreadsheet template.
Yeah, they can email us at engines@nsf.gov, and we'll make sure we get that to the right person if you have issues.
Awesome. Okay, next question. Do sub-awardees have to submit their sections of the proposal, or can we funnel all uploads through the lead organization?
Yeah, sure. So either is fine. So if a sub-awardee is added to the proposal along with a PI or senior personnel from that group, then that person can upload the documents, or the team, if the team chooses, they can funnel all of the documents to a single lead who can upload all the documents. But you have to, in either case, you want to make sure that you're uploading the documents in the proper category. So subawardee one, there's an area where subawardee one's budgets and documents will go within research.gov.
Okay, great. Another one. So if one organization already submitted type 1 proposal as the lead institution, could this organization submit the type 2 proposal as the lead institution? And
I can take that one. The answer is no. It's always been no. You can only submit one engine's proposal as lead organization, whether it's type 1 or type 2.
thank you. And the next one, for some definitions for some people, can you please define the PI/PD that is required to register with NSF? And also, what is a co-PI or PD? And are senior personnel considered co-PIs?
Okay. Yeah. So via research.gov, you will have a lead PI and then 3 additional co-PIs. And essentially those co-PI and co-PDs, the terms are interchangeable with respect to the Engines BAA. But those are the senior personnel. They are called senior personnel, but they're essentially responsible for the project. So any reporting requirements, any auditing requirements, the lead PI and all the co-PIs are responsible for the project. And so a co-PI can exist within the lead organization, or co-PI can exist from a sub-awardee. But from the submissions perspective, there are only 4 of those, the PI and then 3 additional folks. Other senior personnel, which is what you would see when you log into research.gov, there's a category for other senior personnel. Those are also key folks on the leadership team and so forth who are key contributors to the project. They're just not at the stage where we won't call them co-PIs, and they wouldn't be, from NSF perspective, responsible for the carrying out the project itself. And so a sub-awardee could have senior personnel, but someone from a sub-awardee could also be designated as a co-PI, but that's up to the team to decide, how it wants to designate the individuals as part of their
In the project description for type 2, must we include a section for results from prior NSF funding as required by the PAT-G? And then the second part is the BA, actually just the first question.
The results from NSF, results from prior work is not required at the time of proposal submission.
Okay. NSF has asked for applicants to submit a budget for years 1 and 2, but discuss programs from 1 to 10 years. Is there a place you want us to describe the budget for years 3 to 10?
No, just for the submission of the type 2, the only thing that's required is the budget for years 1 and 2. Your budget justification should only focus on years 1 and 2. That doesn't exclude the notion, obviously, that you can talk about your expected plans over the entire period, but we want to, in terms of budgeting, we only want to know about the first 2 years.
And in terms of the budget, how competitive should seed grant funds be reflected in our NSF budget?
I'm sorry, Korie, can you repeat that? How?
Yeah, sorry.
Seed grant-
How should competitive seed grant funds be reflected in the NSF budget?
Okay. Yeah, so there is an expectation that a region is leveraging all of its resources, and so that's all I will say there. If I can just
Dmitri, I think the question is slightly different. I
Mhm.
think this relates to offering competitive seed awards through the budget. So there are 2 possible interpretations. One, your interpretation that this is money that was received by the engine, or as
Correct.
but in the case of competitive seed awards, there's only one category in the budget, which is an other category. There's no other place you can put it. The NSF budget template has some limitations on how you can put information. However, the budget justification should reflect the description of how those funds will be used.
Got it. So thanks, Jeffrey. That's right. So let me just remind everyone. All of these questions are certainly very important, and we want to answer all of them. But for this particular webinar, we really want to focus on questions related to any concerns about the changes that were previously discussed. Any questions, other questions we can answer via engines@nsf.gov. And there will be other opportunities for your teams to meet with program directors to discuss any specific questions for your team.
Okay, another question related to BA changes. Is it NSF's expectation that the lead institution will track the commitment of resources from subcontracted partner orgs in a manner that complies with current federal standard for sub-recipient monitoring?
Yes.
Okay. Should we plan to monitor the non-subcontracted partner organizations and their resource commitments in the same fashion as if they were also subcontractors? Or is that the responsibility of the subcontracted partner?
So can you say that once more, Korie?
Sure. Should we plan to monitor the non-subcontracted partner orgs and their resource commitments in the same fashion as if they were a subcontractor, or is that the responsibility of the subcontracted partner?
Right. If they're, I mean, if you're in an engine and you are preparing and you're operating with folks that not necessarily receive NSF funds, but they are partners contributing to the effort, then from NSF perspective, we're not tracking those things, but from an engine perspective, it would certainly make sense to understand all of the contribution and resources that the engine can leverage. So you're not required to report those things to NSF per se, but from an overall management perspective, certainly it would make sense to account for all of the resources and contributions for the entire engine, if I understand the question correctly.
Okay. Another one. How should industry partners who won't be receiving NSF funding be included in the proposal and submission process?
Yeah, sure. So there's a document, the available resources document that will be submitted as a supplemental doc. Any unfunded collaborations should be included as part of that document. Also, letters of commitment, letters of collaboration from those entities can be included as part of the proposals. And so that's where you would document all of those types of partnerships. And we would call those unfunded partnerships, meaning they're not receiving NSF funds, but are contributing to the project.
In terms of the BAA to start the Type-2 proposal, it was not on ResearchGov. When will it be available?
So the solicitation now is available. So if you go to research.gov and you search for the engines solicitation, it's available for anyone to access as of today.
Okay. Sorry, just looking for more BAA related questions. This has to do a little bit with the deadline date. I guess some people want to know why it changed, and there might be some challenges, but mostly why did the deadline change?
Yeah, sure. So there'll be a number of changes related to the PAPG and some internal systems to NSF. And so to avoid any complications to the proposers, after discussion, and our team felt that it would be better to ensure that all the proposals submissions were in well in advance of those system changes and so forth. And so in order to meet those requirements, as well as to meet our goal of making award decisions within FY23, the option was to move the deadline to an earlier date.
Okay. In terms, so if the PI is the same person, but have changed the lead organization to a nonprofit, will there be any issues?
We can submit, whomever submitted that question can submit it to engines.gov. There's some nuances there, so I can answer that via engines@nsf.gov. And just FYI, so I know that the response rate at engines@nsf.gov hasn't been as fast as it was perhaps 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we apologize for that. We've been dealing with all of the type 1s that have come in, but rest assured that we're tracking all the questions that are coming in, and we will be responding to all of those within the next week. So just in case folks are having challenges in receiving responses from NSF, from engines@nsf.gov within the 2 to 3 business day that we advertise.
Let's see. Another question is, sorry, making sure. So someone who's new to NSF just wants clarity on who is not a PIPD or co-PIPD. They have staff. Sorry, go ahead.
Yep, go ahead, Korie.
I said they have staff who are responsible for managing the process, but who are not necessarily program staff. Would they, I guess, have to be able to set up a proposal since they're not a project PI or PD?
Yeah. So I think I understand the question. And then, sorry, this will have to be the last one, and we'll move to evaluation. But in the scenario that I outlined before, yes, a PI, PD can register with NSF and obtain an NSF ID. But in principle, anyone in the organization staff can also register with NSF ID and declare their role as support and submit and help prepare the proposal. So whether that's folks in the research office or the equivalent in industry, staff can also register and be able to help prepare and submit proposals and not be designated as a PI. All right. So I know we're receiving a number of questions here, but we have to move on to part 2. We are capturing all the questions, and we will categorize them and create a FAQ. But at this time, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Becky Shearman, who will discuss the evaluation plans.
Thanks, Dmitri. Hi, everyone. As Dmitri just mentioned, my name is Becky Shearman. I'm one of the program officers managing the NSF Engines program, and I wanted to spend just a few minutes today discussing the evaluation plans that are a required component of the Type 2 proposal. Before I get into any details here, I do just want to sort of provide a disclaimer. So we're doing this because we have received several questions about the evaluation plan. So we wanted to address them sort of to a broader audience rather than just sort of one-off answers as people's questions come trickling in. But the fact that we are spending some time working on this is not meant to imply that the evaluation plan portion of your proposal is any more important than any other section of the proposal itself, right? So please don't take the attention that we're putting on this right now to suggest that the evaluation plans are in any way weighted more heavily than any other part of your proposal. That is in fact not the case. So I really want to spend a few minutes sort of talking about the general purpose of your evaluation plan, the components of the evaluation plan, and then wrap up with a little bit about how that evaluation plan will be reviewed. So first, the overall purpose of the evaluation plan is really sort of threefold. One, to enable your team to determine the extent to which the goals that you've outlined in your engine proposal are actually being achieved, right? And related to that, we want you to use your evaluation plan to help determine when your engine needs to course correct to ensure that those your intended outcomes are going to be met, right? A 10-year project covers a lot of time, and you want to make sure that you're sort of tracking the progress of your work and are making, you know, adjustments as needed to make sure that you're staying on track to accomplish your goals. And then lastly, we intend to use your evaluation plans to aid in NSF's assessment of your engine's outcomes at the regular project assessment checkpoints throughout the lifetime of your award. So when you stop and think about an evaluation plan and all the components in it, you can start to come up with a pretty lengthy list of elements, right? If you think about sort of a fully developed evaluation plan, you would expect to see not just the purpose and goals of the evaluation, but a good understanding of the program, the needs of the evaluation design, which alone can get pretty lengthy, details about data collection, data analysis, your timeline, your deliverables. And I think it's pretty fair when you're thinking about that to get quite overwhelmed in terms of how can all of that possibly fit into your 30-page proposal that we have asked you to provide, you know, so many additional things, as we've asked you to provide so many other things. How could you possibly fit all of this into that those 30 pages? So we want to kind of break this down and just highlight what are the most important elements that you should really capture in your evaluation plan. I also want to highlight that evaluation plan will be included within your management plan. If you go into the BAA, there are several sections of your management plan. The evaluation is section 5. So what do we want to put into that evaluation plan? It should include a description of the goals and your general approach to the evaluation. So I would see this as fairly broad strokes. You know, once you have a general sense of how you are going to conduct your evaluation, try to summarize that in general terms. I don't want to put a limit to it. But again, I would keep it fairly high level, you know, highlighting the objectives, a few sentences on kind of the model or the approach that you're going to use. But you don't have to get into a full evaluation description for this section. I think it's also important to include a description of how the evaluation is going to be used by your evaluation team. You know, how are you going to use this to inform your decision making, and how are you going to make sure that happens, right? So there's got to be communication, for example, between whoever's doing the evaluation and whoever the decision makers are for the engine itself, right? So some evidence that there's an integration between what's happening amongst the evaluators and what's happening amongst the leaders, so that the data that's coming out of the evaluation is being used to help the engine course correct. As specifically mentioned in the BAA, we expect to see a table outlining the tentative outcomes and the associated indicators of success that you want to use in your evaluation plan. I'm going to come back to that in the next couple of slides. And then lastly, I would consider providing information about your evaluation team, right? What is their expertise? How they're going to be represented as a part of the engine team? What are their roles as members of the engine, as members of the evaluation team? something that I think is really important here, given your page limitation, is that context really matters. I think the best way you can provide a strong evaluation plan is to make sure that it is aligned with what you've put in the narrative within your project description. So if you read through what is expected in your project description, you'll see lots of sections that are closely related to your evaluation plan. So for example, your project description is going to start off with the section on an overview, vision, and rationale, where you first state your engine's goals and objectives, right? Clearly, those should be very well aligned with the goals and objectives of your evaluation plan. I think more importantly, there's a section in your project description called the strategic and implementation plans. And the 4 bullets that I've listed under here, I took right out of the text of the BAA within this section. So when you read that strategic and implementation plan section, it says things like you should have the current state of practice and baseline data for your region. It should include specific gaps that the engine is aiming to address. It should include measures and metrics for success. It should include some plan to gather and track data to measure growth over time, right? So there's going to be a lot of good information that you're including in your proposal about your region, about your assessment of where your region is, especially as it relates to the phases of maturity of an engine, right? That should become clear through the strategic plan. And that's going to really help put your evaluation in context without having to provide a lot of that contextual information within the evaluation plan itself. So what is actually being evaluated? I refer to these as the dimensions of an engine. Some of that is pointed to specifically within the BAA. For example, in that strategic plan section, we call out things like workforce development and R&D, but really you should be thinking about all of the primary components of your engine. We don't articulate them sort of in a list in the BAA, but I think we could probably all agree: workforce development, R&D, translation to practice, partnerships, DEIA, right? These are all core elements of the engine that you can find mentioned in the BAA. Certainly were highlighted in many of our webinars and roadshows. It's up to you to kind of decide how you want to organize them into different dimensions of the engine. I've put up here a screenshot of Appendix A of the BAA. I would point you to that as another resource to help give you a sense of what the critical dimensions are. In the far right column, we have some examples of growth indicator categories, and as you read through them, you'll see things like workforce development, leadership, DEIA. All of these things are visible in that appendix. And this Appendix A also gives you some guidance in terms of where you may be in terms of the maturity of your engine and ecosystem. Okay, and then I wanted to come back to this this table. So we expect a table that includes outcomes and indicators of success, right? And again, we recognize that your pages are limited. So we worked out an example, and this is just an example. The layout is an example, the content is an example, but as a way to get a sense of what we're looking for, I created this table, and I'm just showing you, what you may see in, for example, workforce development, right? In my table, I've listed the goal or objective around workforce development that I've outlined for the engine. In this case, I said we're going to grow a diverse, well-paid, skilled workforce in a topic area that meets the engine's needs. I've identified short and long-term outcomes, and then I have associated indicators for both those short and long-term outcomes. Now, and then I've left it blank, but you can see a second dimension below, the DEIA dimension. And here I've put, well, maybe I've included intermediate outcomes. You know, maybe in the case for DEIA, I have more extensive outcomes. So that can vary. In my short-term outcome for workforce development, here I've written increase in academic industry partnerships to train graduate students, long-term an increase in the number of industry roles being filled by local talent, C-suite to entry level. In this case, both of them don't have precise numbers or benchmarks in the outcomes stated. My advice to teams looking to develop their evaluation plans is, again, to make sure that the outcomes and the indicators are tied closely to that strategic plan. In some cases, if you've got a really, if you've done sort of a thorough gap analysis around a particular dimension and you've really honed in on exactly what is needed, you may be able, you may have much more specific outcomes, right? Because you may know exactly, you know, how many academic institutions are out there, you know, the state of academic and industry partnerships, and you may be able to say something far more specific. We don't want you to just throw numbers down in outcomes just to make it sound like you have very specific outcome measurements. We really want them to be real, right? To be true indicators of short or long-term success. And I think the best way that you're going to be able to convince a panel of reviewers is if the table of outcomes and indicators embedded within your evaluation plan is well aligned with your strategic plan and speaks true to that strategic plan. A few takeaways for this table, because we recognize that this table could get quite large quite quickly. We ask that you do include all the dimensions of the engine that you plan to evaluate, and you do align it with what you've put in your strategic and implementation plans. But we do not expect you to include all the outcomes and indicators for any given dimension, right? So if we go back to that previous slide, we would want to see, you know, workforce development, DEIA, translation to practice, all the things, you know, leadership, partnerships, all the things that you're looking to measure, and give us an example, you know, what is your strongest short and long-term outcome for workforce, and what's the one key indicator that's going to tell you that you've reached that short-term or long-term outcome milestone, right? We would expect that you probably have multiple outcomes and certainly multiple indicators. You don't need to capture all of that. We just want to see that you are thinking seriously about each one of those dimensions and how you're going to capture the progress you're making. And then how are we going to review and then use the evaluation plans? So the evaluation plan will be reviewed as part of the merit review process. In terms of panels, right? There is one solicitation or BAA specific review criteria that highlights, that will point reviewers to whether or not the evaluation plan includes relevant metrics for success appropriate to various phases of the engine. So again, tying this to your narrative within your project description is going to be the best way for reviewers to be able to determine whether or not the metrics that you have included are relevant. We will be requesting additional details about your evaluation plans from regional teams invited to the pre-award site visits, right? So between panel review and making awards, right, there will be a subset of applicants they get invited to site visits. And at that time, those teams would be expected to provide more details of that evaluation plan, which I guess kind of goes back to my first point, which was just that high level overview. I would encourage you to try to flesh out a more complete evaluation plan and then just capture it as a summary in your evaluation plan section of the proposal, rather than trying to just kind of speak about evaluation in more vague terms, because assuming your proposal reviews competitively, you'll need to be sharing that information with us in the future anyway. And then NSF will work with teams and negotiate the final evaluation plan with awardees during the first 6 months of the award date. And then lastly, post-award, NSF is going to be using these outcomes, the engine outcomes, NSF will assess the engine's outcomes against your evaluation plan at regular assessment checkpoints, as is captured in the cooperative agreement. And to wrap up with a few final tips and recommendations, we would encourage you to start working with people that have experience in an evaluation now. They can provide some great guidance on how to capture the most salient points in your evaluation plan. Seek guidance from experts in the different areas, the different dimensions of the engine that you're planning to evaluate. So whether it's workforce, regional economic development, there are so many different ways you can measure something, right? So figuring out what the key indicators are, folks with the expertise are going to be able to point you in the right direction. Leverage publicly available data whenever possible. This would be true for collecting baseline data, as well as using it as a part of your regular evaluation or sort of assessment cycle as part of your evaluation. And then make sure you budget for evaluation appropriately. Right? It will cost to bring in some evaluators, so we would expect to see that in the budget as well. And that's all I have for slides. I think we are going to open it up to questions again.
Yes, thank you, Becky. We have a few evaluation questions. So are there budget limits to evaluation? Any limitations on how much they can budget for that?
There are no budgetary restrictions or limitations on that for evaluation.
Okay. Next one, how important is it to have separation between the engine team and evaluation team?
So that's a really good question. And that's something that I think all teams need to grapple with. I think you want to, the evaluators have to be independent enough, right, to be able to do their work kind of free from bias, but they also need to be able to be well connected with the leadership team. There are plenty of organizations that have internal evaluators. A lot of universities, right, have internal evaluators. I don't think you want to see the folks that are making the decisions about the engine being the folks doing the evaluation. But whether or not you get someone who stays entirely external, or someone who is internal, but working with the external evaluators, there's a lot of ways to do that. But I do think you want to be thoughtful about maintaining some distance between the evaluators and the decision makers.
Said, do you suggest having an internal evaluator or an external evaluator, both, just one?
I think my last answer kind of captured that. I think there's a lot of ways to do it. But I think it's how you can demonstrate that there's enough distance between your evaluator and your decision makers. But I don't think that means sort of hard and fast, it cannot be an internal evaluator.
So in terms of so our costs for external evaluation partners allowable expenses during the first 2-year budgets.
Dmitri, I may hand that over to you.
Yes, you can certainly include in your budget, your line item budget, the expenses for an evaluator, certainly.
Will there be any opportunities for organizations with expertise in evaluation to find engines to partner with?
Not beyond the Tableau, tool that we've already shared for the concept outlines, although I wouldn't anticipate evaluators to be looking there. So yeah, I think it's going to be kind of on the teams to reach out and find the evaluators rather than the other way around.
Another one in terms of budget, does NSF have a rule of thumb for how much should go towards evaluation support, a minimum or potentially a maximum?
So we haven't specified any minimum or any type rule of thumb there. I do know, within the industry of, I suppose that's the right term for evaluators, there are rules of thumb that they would use. And so if I'm a lead and I want to explore having an external evaluator or in partnership with an internal evaluator, then there are a number of different publications that talk about kind of what's a rule of thumb that an evaluator or an organization that's going to do the evaluation would expect to be paid. So that's the statement that we would give. We haven't specified any specific numbers there.
Yeah. Another one is a line that they want a clarification on. It says NSF will negotiate the final evaluation plan with the awardee within 6 months. They want a clarification on that statement.
Yeah, so we will be working with the with the awardees in those first 6 months on their evaluation plan around various details so that there's alignment across awardees and alignment with evaluation of the program itself. So we would expect that some aspects of the evaluation plan would be kind of tweaked as once they've gotten the award and we're looking kind of at our community of awardees. Dmitri, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. Just a little context. So we can imagine that there may be engines funded in various regions, and certain metrics and measures may be relevant to in one region but not the other. And so we want to be flexible enough to allow engines to develop the evaluation plans that make sense for their region and their stakeholders. At the same time, obviously, the program will need to evaluate engines and perhaps and develop kind of standard reporting requirements. So there will be some components that need to be standard across all engines, but then there will be some that may be customized for the specific engine. And so after the award is made, NSF and the team and its evaluators will work through a more detailed evaluation plan and come to an agreement on evaluation plans specific to each engine.
This one is about expectations, so of the value of evaluation expertise. So should it be on the main trust, one for use inspired, one for research, workforce development, or should it be an overall program evaluation in general?
So it's one evaluation overall. Given the breadth of an engine, I do think it may be hard to expect, for example, if you hire an evaluator, to have expertise in everything from regional economic development to DEIA. So I think depending on the team that you bring in, there maybe there is a need to contract out, some expertise in a particular area as you're developing the plan. But I think, there's that design component that's going to require that expertise. There's data collection where maybe that expertise isn't, the discipline specific expertise isn't as critical as the evaluation expertise. So I think you need a strong evaluation team where you can then reach out to discipline experts as needed to inform the evaluators. That would be my approach. Dmitri, feel free to, or
Yeah, sure.
Jeffrey, anyone on the call. Sorry, Jeffrey.
Yeah, sure. So I think, my experience in working with large projects as a participant, as well as my role here, oftentimes, there are internal evaluators at the different organizations. So if I'm a university and I'm the lead, it's likely I have an internal person within the university who understands perhaps the use-inspired research or the evaluation of use-inspired research or translation. If I'm partnering with economic development folks or workforce development, it's likely that internal to the partner organizations, that there are folks who understand the evaluation process that's typically undertaken. And so you want to make use and leverage your existing resources in your partner organizations, but you might seek an external evaluator that is going to bring all of those components together. And so that's just one approach that I've seen that can work. But yes, certainly given the breadth of areas that will be covered under the engine, you do want to have to account for all of those areas, and that also will speak to how well integrated your overall program is. So I hope that provides some insight.
The next couple questions would be on the indicators table. So for the outcomes and indicators table, would it be important to show specific target metrics, including baseline and aspirational targets, or is indicator sufficient without targets?
So a couple of things. I think the more specific you can be, the better it is. But that's only if you have the data at that moment to do it, right? It's very easy to kind of drop in numbers in to create baselines. It's a totally different thing to make sure that they are actually rooted in the information of your region. So better to be, true to your current understanding of the region than to try to make things up. In terms of what goes in, I really want to just emphasize that it kind of depends on what's in your strategic plan. I think the key here is to be consistent with whatever you put in that strategic plan piece, and make sure it aligns. So if you've got baseline data there, you don't necessarily have to repeat baseline data in your table, but whatever the short and long-term outcomes and indicators are should make sense relative to the baseline data that you've provided in the earlier part of the narrative, right? So because you don't have a lot of room, don't repeat anything that you really don't have to, right? And just make sure you're kind of referring back to your strategic plan. Dmitri.
Yeah, and if I understand the question correctly, Corey, whether you can just include the indicators themselves versus including uh, targeted values for each indicator, then for the proposal submission, as Becky said, certainly if you have targets and it makes sense within context, then obviously you can provide those. But for the table that Becky outlined, then you're listing your indicators, right? That tells us or the reviewer that you've identified a certain select number of indicators that you think will be useful to measure whether we are moving in the right direction or not towards a specific goal. But you don't necessarily have to outline all of your targets at the proposal submission. As we move along in the evaluation process, move towards site visits, and then if an award is actually made over that 6-month period, then we would certainly expect greater details from the baseline as well as reasonable targets for the next evaluation checkpoint.
Thank you for that clarification. Another one is, are the growth indicator categories in the appendix examples of where the engine should be after funds have been received and the engine has developed?
Let me. So the appendix, and Dmitri, correct me if I'm wrong, but the appendix A is kind of distinct from when dollars are received, right? So you're looking at, for each phase, the indicators that would indicate that you're within that phase, right?
Right. So I think I can clarify here. So the appendix in the BAA was intended to allow teams to evaluate their current region and determine whether they are in a specific phase, development phase versus nascent and emergent. And so there we kind of outline some metrics and indicators to kind of help teams identify their current phase. So that was the purpose of that table there. Obviously, then you can extrapolate and say, well, if I'm in the nascent phase, if I want to move to the next phase, then I could use these indicators as kind of targets to where I should be headed. So we don't necessarily expect folks to use it for that purpose. As we looked at regions and tried to study some baseline data on various regions, and it'll be very important which is why we have this 6 months period where NSF will work with the team to better understand their baseline and define targets that actually make sense in consultation with the region and its evaluators. So the important point is really to understand, what it is you want to measure, what your objectives are, and then what indicators would allow you to evaluate whether you are progressing in the right direction or not, or whether there should be a pivot and so forth. The actual target values, that's really has to be a function of your current baseline and what's available within your region, right? So if I'm proposing to grow in workforce development, for example, if I want to produce a number of programs and so forth, then that has to be necessarily in partnership with your industry partners, right? What are their needs in terms of workforce development? And so the target should be a reflection of those things. And we would hope that during that 6-month period, perhaps before, that teams will be working to truly define what the targets are. Whereas at the proposal submission stage, they define what their goals are, define what the metrics that they would evaluate as outcomes, and then what are those indicators that will say that we're headed in the right direction or not.
You're muted, Corey.
You're muted, Corey.
Thank you. There were a few questions about baseline. And so is it okay, or can that be a part of the proposal to develop a clear baseline within the first 2 years, if they don't necessarily have one immediately?
So I can say this about that, Becky, and then you can correct me. I think it's, yes, you can include, establishing and understanding those baselines as part of your process. But I would say if you're writing this is for a type 2 proposal, which the implications are that you are at a certain stage and that you've evaluated your region to determine that you are, in fact, ready to adopt a type 2. And so to some degree, there should be some level of baselining that has already taken place, and that should come across in the proposal itself. All right, so that's one level of baselining, if you will. In terms of baselining with respect to a well-developed evaluation plan, then certainly there may be a need for greater detail and more specific data. And so there has to be some balance there, right? So that's how I would approach that if I'm writing a type 2 proposal. That is, there should be some expectation that we've done some baselining. That's how we determine that we're ready for a type 2. But then there still should be, some greater detail that may need to be done and carried out in partnership with or in collaboration with your actual evaluation team. Becky, did you want to?
No, I agree with that. I think if you're applying for a type 2, hopefully you already have a decent understanding of that baseline. I think when I think about the evaluation, I think where some things may still be unclear could be, there's where where you think you need to be, but how quickly can you realistically get there? That may not be clear just yet, right? You may need to kind of start developing these relationships and realize kind of early on that, okay, that intermediate outcome is not going to happen quite as quickly as we thought. So our benchmarks are, we can't have an accurate kind of benchmark for an intermediate outcome until we start, trying to make progress towards our short term or something like that. So in that sense, I see where a lot of that will have to get developed, once the engine starts moving along. But I do think you should have a pretty good sense of the baseline, just as a part of the narrative, as Dmitri was saying.
Another question on the evaluation, because of the indicators, it seems like it has a heavy quantitative focus. So are we interested in a qualitative component to the evaluation as well?
Yes, I would say that both qualitative and quantitative data should be used for the various dimensions, and for some of the dimensions, they may naturally rely heavily on quantitative data, but I think with others, qualitative data is going to be really important. I can imagine, especially around equity and inclusion, right? It's not just about, numbers of people or even disaggregated by demographics, right? But it's also the quality of their experience in the training programs. That's going to be just as important as the numbers. So some of that you're only going to capture through qualitative analysis.
Does the evaluation plan overlap with the data management plan?
Yeah, no. So the data, so there's a data management plan is a specific supplemental document that NSF requires. So the data management plan is how your team is gonna actually manage any data resources that have been produced from the project itself. I suppose some of the evaluation data could be included in that, but these are two separate documents. And you can find what's required in the data management plan. You can also find a discussion of that in the NSF PAP sheet.
I think you might have touched on this earlier, but another question, do evaluators need to be captured as a sub-awardee or just a budget line item? Do they need to provide a letter and be listed as additional resources?
So, yeah, that's a good question. It's really, I guess, can be up to the team whether you want to specify the person or the organization as a sub-awardee, or I think the other option is a consultant. Yeah, I don't think, there's nothing on our side that prevents either one. It's up to the engine to decide what's best for the team. But those are the options. You can be a sub-awardee or listed as a consultant. And it depends on what works best for the team.
Dmitri, what about the other part of that question about resources? I don't have the question in front of me, but.
Was it, do they need to provide a letter and be listed as additional resources?
No, no, you can describe the evaluator or the organization and as being that's part of your team, but no, you don't have to include a letter of collaboration or anything like that for an evaluator.
And another question, can we use the new / existing resources supplement section to add details about the evaluation plan if industry partners are providing resources to support the evaluation plan? Sure,
yes. So I think, yes, that part, the answer to that question is yes. If you have a collaborator who is funding an evaluator or an organization, certainly you can include it there. I'm trying to pull up a budget template now. I think there's an option for a contracts as well, and oftentimes people could list an evaluator as in the line item for contracts. So whomever asked that question, if you can submit the question to engines@nsf.gov, and we'll write a more precise answer and include it in the FAQ.
And I think maybe one or two last questions. I think you already emphasized this, Becky, but someone asked, what is the level of granularity of these evaluation plans?
So for the proposal, other than the table where you may talk in more detail about or indicate in more detail about your outcomes and indicators, this is going to be fairly high level. You're really going to have to give us an overview of your approach, but in terms of getting into details around design, data collection, data analysis, all the things that you would expect to kind of articulate in an evaluation plan, we're going to need kind of just a high level summary of that rather than the details there. And then we would expect to see more of those details in the pre-award site visits.
We had another question is, are you anticipating experimental design usage in the evaluation plan?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, or I'm interpreting that question to be asking, do we expect to see details about the experimental design in the proposal? And I think similar to my last response, it's gonna by necessity, given your 30-page limit to your proposal, it's going to have to be limited to, you know, an overview summary of what that design approach design would be, and then we would be looking for more details in future site visits.
And that's the majority of the questions.
Okay, all right, great. Well, we'd like to, that's the end of this webinar for today. And we'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy day to attend. And again, we have collected all the questions and we will sort through them, categorize them, create an FAQ for this webinar specifically. And if you have other specific questions that are related to your team, your engine, or region of service, please submit those at engines@nsf.gov. And hopefully within the next week, we will be back on pace to answer questions within our standard 2 to 3 business days, if not before. Okay, so thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.